This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Talk It Out. I am here in the studio this week, again, as always, with Georgie Dent, our contributing editor on Women's Agenda. How are you, Georgie?
I'm very well, thank you.
And I'm also here with Kate Mills, who has worked a little bit with Women's Agenda in various ways in the past. She's a former editor of BRW magazine, media professional. She started Professional Mums and recently sold that business. How are you, Kate?
Really good. Really happy to be here, ladies.
Great. Okay, well, lots to get it stuck into today. We are talking about unconscious bias training, whether it's worth it, whether it can solve some of the issues facing various businesses in Australia and internationally. We'll talk a little bit about productivity and when are the best times to work, as well as having a laptopless life and career, and if that's actually possible. And I will be asking Kate, Georgie, and even myself about the one thing that we're really talking about or that's on our mind this week. So I might start with unconscious bias training. And today, as we are recording, Starbucks has closed 8,000 of its outlets in the US, more than 8,000 I believe it is, to have all their employees participate in unconscious bias training. And this follows an incident a few weeks ago in which two African American men were police were called on them because the store managers were alarmed that they'd entered the store and hadn't ordered anything and were sitting there. I think it was just for a few minutes. So that followed a massive public outrage regarding that, and this is the move that Starbucks have moved to make in order to show that they are addressing the problem. Georgie, what do you think do you think this can address that kind of problem? Is it a worthwhile move? I mean, it's obviously actually quite expensive for Starbucks to close their stores for half a day.
Yeah, absolutely. I also do just want to say from the outset that I think I'm with those men. If I ever go into a Starbucks store, I never order a coffee.
I think they may have been about to order a coffee, but I thought a lot of people go into Starbucks stores just to use the free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and in Europe for warmth, I've done that on many occasions.
And I'm worried the message is if you don't order in Starbucks, you get arrested. You know, that's what they're sending out. It's very dangerous.
It is.
Which they should address their coffee if that's the case. But
on the subject of unconscious bias training, I think that it is. I mean, the thing I like about it is that the company is not trying to sweep the problem under the carpet, and they're not trying to sort of put out a press release and massage the language to make it look like it's okay. I think that, it follows today, the ABC network in America have also just cancelled Roseanne's show, which has been rating really well, but off the back of quite a racist tweet that she sent about Barack Obama's former chief of staff.
Yeah.
And I think
Trump was a big fan.
Yeah, which is, so I do think that there's something quite powerful about the company saying, okay, there's a problem and we're going to try and do something about it. I think unconscious bias is probably not a problem that can be solved in 4 hours of training. But having said that, I don't think it's going to be necessarily a bad thing to have a whole lot of people sort of made aware of what unconscious bias is and how it might be working.
Yeah, and maybe aware of the incident that occurred and why it occurred, and it might make people think twice about calling the police next time. What do you think, Kate?
So I agree with Georgie in that unconscious bias isn't going to solve all of the problems, but I do think that it's one part of it. You know, unconscious bias has been training has been really popular, and I think we get a little bit concerned when we see the same type of training rolled out. You know, we get a little bit disillusioned, particularly when we don't see a lot of change. So unconscious bias training has been rolled out across pretty much all Australian corporates, and good on them. I think it's a great idea they've done it. Has it really changed anything that much? Not really, and look, that's partly because unconscious bias isn't the only problem you have, and it's also because in the end change is slow. But I agree, I think it's a really good idea that Starbucks have done it. I mean, even if they and I think effectively what they're trying to do is get across to their staff, this is the kind of organisation we are. We take this very seriously. We're willing to invest in you and in us as a public organisation in being a better organisation, and all power to them. Will it solve all the problems of how certain people are perceived in society? Not at all. I find unconscious bias, I don't know if either of you have ever done any unconscious bias training or any of those little tests that you can do online. I find it really interesting. So I've done some of those online tests where you go and you do, look at faces and you look at words. And look, I'm half black, but I came out as being unconsciously biased against black people because it's such a broad way in the way that we look and perceive people. One of the things I get that I really notice about unconscious bias, mainly because I work with a lot of corporates, is height. So I'm quite short. And it's really interesting when you walk into a room of leaders, corporate leaders, generally they're all really tall, and you spend your whole time looking up. And I had this woman come up to me a few weeks ago and she wanted to talk about leadership and being a leader. And she's really smart and, she's really going places, but she's really short. And in my head, I thought to myself, oh, it's going to be really hard for you. You just don't, what we perceive of as being a leader. And that's people like me. I consider myself, pro-diversity, pro-different types of leadership. But those unconscious biases, they're so deeply ingrained in us, very difficult to overcome.
I do wonder whether, because I agree with you, Kate, that a lot of large corporations have certainly undertaken unconscious bias training for their staff. I do wonder whether with Starbucks, because from my understanding it's all staff, so it's not just the people in head office, where I think maybe this is a generalisation, but I think potentially that is where this sort of training has been focused in the past. I think that this is a different section of the workforce. It's for customer-facing roles. And so, I don't think that shifting unconscious bias is such a big thing, because as you said, Kate, it's not as simple as just being aware of it. It is the way that we have been programmed over a long period of time. There's all different reasons why we have the biases that we do, even against ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of that in terms of women are biased against themselves a lot. But I do think, I think it's quite impressive actually that Starbucks have taken this step.
Yeah, I think it's a good PR move as well, following a rather horrific PR moment, I guess. I note that in Sydney recently, a major retailer in Mossman, the staff there, I think it came from the management. I don't think this reflects the company at all, but they put out a job ad, and this obviously goes well beyond unconscious bias, put out a job ad requesting or clearly stating that they'd prefer an Anglo-Saxon candidate, which I think got a lot of negative press about that, obviously, for good reason. But I wonder, do you think that there's a lot of companies in Australia that might want to think about this sort of taking this sort of stand, closing their stores, particularly for their customer-facing staff, and introducing some kind of unconscious bias training as well? Because you're right, Georgie, it does tend to happen in corporates as opposed to across customer-facing roles in smaller retail outlets.
I think the other thing that we should probably think about with Starbucks, I think it's partly their customers, I think it's also their staff. So if you go into Starbucks in America, a lot of the staff are black. So which, to be honest, because we're a less diverse society in terms of colour, not necessarily in terms of ethnicity, it's slightly different pressures. Like, I think Starbucks was very much under pressure to do it internally as well, from its staff saying, well, I said a large percentage of us are black too. What would happen? Would we be allowed to work here? So there's two different aspects of it. I also think it's interesting what you said about that store. Sometimes I quite like biases to be surfaced, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that sort of explicit discrimination, it makes it, you can't hide behind it. Because I think that we have this idea, and I think it happens with women, but I also think it happens with race in particular, and we've seen it just recently. There's a lot of people who would deny vehemently that there is any racism whatsoever in Australia. People say the same thing about sexism, and we know that that is completely false. And an instance like this makes it very clear. You wonder that, I'm sure that that retail outlet has had non-Anglo-Saxon employees in the past. I'm sure they've had non-Anglo customers in the past. And you think, I wonder how those people feel when they see an ad like that. Maybe it's actually quite reassuring for them, because they think, actually, I wasn't imagining it. That person really doesn't approve of me. They don't look at me in the same way that they look at other people.
And I think it comes back to a lot of things that are happening now. the more you, in some ways, the more you push those things under the carpet, sometimes the uglier they are when they erupt. So if you think back to all the recent discussion around gender diversity and women on boards, and the whole AMP thing. So I've been out talking to some men who work in senior roles in corporates, and some of them have said to me, I'm really surprised, Kate. I'm absolutely really surprised and shocked that these kind of attitudes prevail, around the idea that, perhaps there are too many women on boards and, too many inexperienced female directors. And I say to them, well, I'm really glad that the conversation gets flushed out, to be honest with you, because it is there, it is a conversation, it is perceptions, and if you just constantly brush it away and you push it under the carpet, you never actually discuss it. And that's why bringing it back to what Starbucks has done, why I think they've done is so good. They could have brushed that under the carpet. I mean, to be honest with you, they got a lot of bad press, but the news cycle is so ferocious. 3 days later, something else is on top. In reality, it would have made the news for a day or two, and then it would have got buried.
Yeah, I wish Barnaby Joyce heard that lesson, but anyway,
exactly. Well,
but I think, I think you're right, and this goes to the point that I was making earlier, that I think that change is happening at the moment, and I know I have said this before, I've written it before. There was a lot of criticism around Me Too initially, that it's simply a hashtag and nothing will come from it. But I think in a variety of different ways, we are seeing increasingly that there is an appetite among corporates to actually take action and for there to be consequences. The situation at Nike, where a number of executives who had been sort of known to be harassing staff were all forced to leave. I think the fact that Starbucks have taken this rather than just pretending, letting the news cycle continue. And I think that's a really positive thing. And I do think that is quite a distinct change from even quite recently, I think.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
Okay, we might move on to the next topic. So I wanted to talk a little bit about productivity and knowing your best time to actually work. And this topic follows a book by Daniel Pink. He talks about how, as individuals, we all have various timings of when we work and when we should be doing deep work, or when we might want to consider doing administrative work, or when we might want to consider doing ideas and brainstorming and that sort of thing. So, Kate, I know that we've previously had various conversations about work and when we work, and so do you have particular times? Do you know times that work best for you?
Oh, absolutely. And I find this a really interesting topic, and one that I've sort of struggled with. And some of my struggles have come down to, so like Daniel Pink has this idea that, essentially, not for everyone, but you're better early in the morning, and then we all know the mid-afternoon slump, and then actually you rise again like a phoenix in the evening. And I certainly struggle with that. So I am best early at the morning. I'm probably best at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I used to actually struggle about whether should I give that best time? Who should I give that best time to? Should I give it to my children? Should I give it to work, or should I give it to me? Because probably 6 to 10 is my peak time for getting things done, and then things slow off after that. So yeah, I agree. You definitely have productivity peaks. The issue about where you give it and how you give it, and also how understanding organisations are of that. So when I worked at Fairfax, for example, so I'm really good until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I used to come in and I used to work really hard from sort of 9 till 3 and just get all my work done. And then at 3 o'clock, I would actually go for a run because I wanted to clear my head. I wanted to go for a run. And then at 4 o'clock, I would faff around for about half an hour and I would talk to people and I would sort my desk out and sort of get ready for tomorrow. And then I'd do the child run, pick up, go. And then at 8 to 10 o'clock or 8 to 11, I would edit work because it's that kind of creative thinking I needed to be on my own. That really worked for me. But you need an organisation that's flexible enough to watch, that's happy to know that you're faffing, from sort of half 3 till 4.
And in that kind of work, you had very clear outputs as well.
Yes.
I think that there is something easier in a media company being able to support that because they can see, you're putting out a weekly magazine, I believe, at that point. So it's quite clear. And I remember when I started a business magazine, I used to, very much before kids, I would regularly do an all-nighter the night before press day, which sounds ridiculous to me, and I would never do that now. But at the time, that worked for me, and it would mean that I'd end up spending a day faffing about, basically, because that was how I was operating and it could support it. But I guess in other organisations, it's unfortunately, the outputs are not so clear. They want to see the desk time. They might not know that you're doing that deep work later on at night. They might see you going for a run at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and think, what's all that about? What do you think, Georgie? How do you work? And I know that with Kate, because we've had these conversations before, is that idea you don't want to give away your best hours.
No, exactly. And so, I mean, I'm the same in that I think I probably work best between about 7 and 12. I think that's probably my peak productivity time. So I find if I have any meetings, particularly longer meetings in that space, it disrupts my day in that I don't find I'm as productive later in the day. I think the same thing as Kate with small children, and in our household it just depends on what morning it is, who's doing what. But on the days when if I can't start work until sort of after 9, which particularly when our middle daughter started school, they started at 9:15 for the first term, and she didn't want me to leave until she was in her classroom, and I found that quite restrictive, because I really noticed that sort of rather than starting at 8:30, starting at sort of 9:30, I lost quite a key hour. So my preference is to sort of not have events or meetings in that time, because I feel like I'm already juggling between my work and the kids in those hours. Afternoon is when I find it's better for me to do the admin type work, respond to emails, just do the bits and pieces. And then if I have to, I'm quite good sort of probably from about 7 till 9 at night. I'll often do some writing then, or I'll do a piece of work, and I find that. And I think it's interesting when you work in your peak time, it's so much easier than when you're sort of working in your non-peak time and you're really up against it. I really notice that the flow just isn't there for me in the afternoons.
And I think that, like, with what you mentioned about exercise during the day, and it's where we do see the rates of exercise with women drop off, particularly if you're working full-time and you have kids. We see a huge drop-off after mid-30s. And so I do wonder if we could find a way to better support how people prefer to work and when they work best, that maybe then to almost just make it more acceptable for people to then exercise at different times of the day according to their needs, maybe according to the trough that Daniel Pink writes about as well.
Well, it's funny because I used to work with Kate at BRW magazine, and I knew her schedule quite well, and that was exactly how she described it. I used to go to Fairfax had a gym, and they also had showers and towels, and it was made very easy. And I used to exercise sort of between 12 and 1. I would go to the gym most days, which worked out perfectly because I had, a child, only one child at that point, but she was in daycare, so it meant I didn't have to organise extra babysitting for me to be able to fit exercise in. I would often go, and when you exercise, it's often thinking time. So if I sort of divided my day, I'd do work quite hard in the morning, and then if I could go to the gym, I'd go to the gym. And while you're there, you're thinking about whatever it is you've just written or what you have to write or who you're about to interview. So it's not really dead time as such, but you have to be in a workplace where that's possible and supported. And I sort of miss that arrangement.
Can I just push back on something you said there, Angela? I do think that it is much easier to measure people's outputs than some industries say it is. A lot of industries do that pushback, and they go, well, that's easy for your industry, but in our industry, output can't be measured. I want to say that is absolutely rubbish. In every industry, output can be measured. It's just sometimes the measurement is different. So you're right, when you're producing a magazine, the measurement's pretty clear. It's the magazine.
It's tangible, I guess.
It's tangible, yeah. But, otherwise the measurement might be client surveys. The measurement might be, and generally is, to be honest with you, how much money has your department made this month? That is a very simple measurement for everyone to follow. And if your department or your individual is hitting budget, then you're measuring their output, And so really, I always say, this in the end, what this conversation is around people not wanting to have hard conversations with people about performance. So instead of having that hard conversation about performance, they say, I'd prefer it if you were in the office from 9 till 6.
If I could just see you, it would make me feel better.
That made me feel better, rather than me actually have to take you to one side and say, I think I've got an issue with your performance and I'm going to have a really hard conversation with you. So I really push back on that. I say, of course people's output can be measured. And I also think it's interesting, and it picks up on your point, Georgie. In the end, I think I'm always working. Like this idea that it's just different types of work. When I had a team of people, it took me a long time to realise, because I actually just really like talking to people. That's like my favourite thing in the world. And I remember saying to someone one day, I'd been in the office all day and all I'd done is talk to people. And I said to someone, I haven't done much work, I've just been talking. And she went, that's work, that's leadership. You're out there, you're talking to everyone in your team, you're figuring out how they feel. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, where I kind of went, you're absolutely right. Like, me spending the day talking to people is me working. It's me investing in my team and figuring out what's happening. I think part of the problem is that our vision of work is still quite Victorian. You know, it's like, you need to be in the factory, you know, it's like, you know, Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, screwing the, you know, toothpaste lids on for that to be work, you know, whereas we live in the knowledge industry. Taking time to think is so valuable.
And we also get a lot of shitty leaders in the knowledge industry as well, and maybe that's part of it as well, because it's this idea of, well, they've got the technical skills, so they need to somehow prove their technical output, but while they're doing that, they're forgetting to have those difficult conversations and those good conversations and the feedback conversations with their staff. And I think, I don't know, Georgie, if you saw this in the legal industry, but I know that that's the sense that I get from friends and people I've interviewed in the legal sector, is that they see people who they get to partner or they get to lead because of their technical skills, but it doesn't actually reflect their leadership skills, and they can end up making people miserable along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that is replicated across the board. I think in most lines of work, someone who's technically quite good tends to progress and advance, and then as you do that, inevitably you take on leadership responsibilities. I think when I was a legal reporter and used to interview partners a lot, they would talk about how difficult it was once they became partner, that suddenly now they had to be a leader. But the reality is, in an ideal world, you are a leader from the minute you start your work, because in whatever role you're in a law firm, for example, even as a junior sort of, you know, graduate, you have to manage stakeholders. You have to manage the partner that you're working for, the senior associates that you're working for, the EA in the team who manages all the logistics. And each of us, I mean, you are exercising leadership capability at every point, but it does seem that under the way organisations currently work, people can still progress without necessarily having particularly compelling skills in the leadership realm.
And I think this is a really big structural issue for a lot of organisations. It's been talked about for a long time. I know very few organisations who've done it, where essentially the reason that happens is because the only way to earn more money is to become a leader, you know, rather than actually say to your top technicians, you're a brilliant technician, which is going to keep paying you more every year, you know, because you're really good at that. We're not going to let you lead anyone because you're really terrible. So don't worry about it, but you will get paid more. When what happens is you hit that ceiling as a technician and you go, I need to become a manager because I want some extra money because I've got a mortgage and I've got all of those kind of things.
Yeah, maybe we could reframe it as being, we'll let you lead with your technical expertise and your skills and what you can do with those clients, but we won't let you manage. Or maybe not using the phrase let you, but I wonder if there's different ways to put it, that to let those people go ahead and be great leaders in doing that awesome work and what that delivers for their clients, but, you know, treat management as quite differently, and back to the idea that it can be all about conversations. And I think back to some of the best managers that I've had, I'd watch them and they wouldn't stay back late. They wouldn't get trapped in details and things like that. They'd be talking to people constantly and have their door open and invite you in, and just make sure that they take the time to respond to you.
And I think that goes to, in this conversation, what we need to do is we need to push back against the culture of busy. You know, that's something, you know, I'm so busy. I interviewed this a coach of CEOs, and he coaches very senior sort of ASX 50 CEOs. And I said, what do you see with them? And he goes, do you know, Kate, it's amazing. He says, they're all so busy. And I keep saying to them, you're not supposed to be busy. You know, you're supposed to be thinking. You know, you're supposed to be talking to people. You've got other people to be busy. But there is a cult of busyness, you know, whereas I'm so busy and I worked late and I did this and this and that. We need to embrace the cult of, I don't want to say laziness, but, you know, the cult of leaving at 5 o'clock, you know, understanding that work is about having conversations and building relationships.
And empowering other people to do the work instead of just holding it all yourself.
That's right. They can be busy for you.
I think in some ways, and this is, again, I'm resorting to generalisations, but I think that there's something in, as it currently stands, being a working mother, I think, enables you to focus on efficiency in a way that other people might not have permission to do. So, I mean, I found when I went back to work after having a child, when you've got it, I mean, I think I was always quite efficient anyway, but I think I've never been someone who wanted to stay at my desk until 8 o'clock at night purely for the sake of it. Even when I was at uni and I used to study, you know, the week before exams, I would always study from 8 till 6, flat out, have an hour break for lunch. But I wouldn't study overnight because I was like, this is... And I think when you have a child, you sort of do have parameters that force you to become more efficient, and it makes you realise that you actually can be incredibly productive in within 8 till 6. You can. You don't have to work around the clock.
I know I definitely had to learn that lesson because I was the opposite. I would leave everything, do the all-nighters constantly, and you just can't do that when you have kids because they might be awake during the night, or they might be awake for the next 3 nights and you would have missed out on the opportunity for sleep. I need to start to move on to the next topic and start to begin wrapping up because we went on a huge tangent, which was a great tangent. But I wanted to touch briefly on, and it relates to this topic as well, laptopless life. I will ask you about the thing that you're talking about this week. And I know that, Georgie, you wrote about this last week with after the breakfast with Jack Dorsey, the co-founder and the CEO of Twitter. He's also the CEO of Square. So you'd think he would actually be quite a busy man, but maybe he's learnt the art of busyness and put it down to empowering other people to do more of the work and do more thinking. But he did make the comment that he doesn't own a laptop, which sort of inspired a few gaffes in the room. He does everything off his phone, and he talked about the idea that this keeps him really focused on exactly what he's doing. Georgie, could you work entirely off a phone?
No, and I wouldn't actually want to be honest, because I find it even frustrating. Obviously, when I'm on the bus, there's lots of times when I do send emails from my phone, when I'm picking up the kids from school and you're just in the car or whatever it is. But I find I'm not nearly as effective when I'm working on my phone as I am when I sit down in my laptop. And I don't know whether that's a learned thing, because when I'm sitting down with my laptop, that's my actual proper thinking work time. So for me, it's it
might be the change of environment. That you go and sit and you're in that focus moment as opposed to being somewhere else.
Having said that, I think a lot of the points that Jack Dorsey made about how in meetings they're technology free, because he said that way you can have a 15-minute meeting that's actually quite meaningful if everyone is at the table and is engaged for a full 15 minutes,
laptops
as
closed,
opposed to having an hour where people are sort of faffing about and some people are on their laptops and others aren't. I think there's definitely value in seeking out technology-free zones for work.
Yeah.
Personally, I couldn't work without a laptop.
Yeah. Kate?
I couldn't work without a laptop either. Look, I am really careful about how much I use technology. I'm a really big fan of thinking and relaxing. I think it's very powerful. So my phone isn't that enabled. I don't have that many apps on it. I rarely send any emails on it. I use it because I have to, and I've got to be connected with people. And I try and spend a lot of time with my laptop closed. I try and spend a lot of time in nature, to be honest with you. I really look out for trying to spend some time in nature every day. But everyone works differently. Jack Dorsey's been hugely successful.
It's obviously working for him.
Yeah, and I think Square in particular is an amazing little innovation. Everyone's got to find the way it works for them. And that's the beauty of the world that we live in at the moment. In fact, but if anything, I would say that, my general position at the moment is I think you need to be careful about how much you use technology, to be honest with you. I think you need to sort of lean against it, because the lean is towards technology. So every time I think you can lean against it and think, do I really need to take my phone with me to this meeting?
I think that's actually my biggest issue when I think about if I just did all my work on my phone. It actually terrifies me, because I would say at the moment I'm more conscious than ever of doing less on my phone than I currently do, because I think it is so addictive.
It is, and it can start at night, early mornings,
exactly.
in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So, I think that's where I am definitely trying to pull back from my phone, not lean into it.
So, for example, I don't use my phone on the bus. I daydream. I like daydreaming. I like putting my head against the side of the window. Just letting thoughts pull through. There's plenty of time to be on your phone.
So, Kate, I'm about to get to your one thing that you're talking about this week, but I might just mention mine because it does relate to this topic as well, and it was that I ended up on this surf retreat with a bunch of amazing women a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't know this before I went there, but when I got to where we were staying, my phone immediately did not work, and I realised that I was having 48 hours of Wi-Fi phone-free time, which horrified me greatly because I've never been a believer in a Wi-Fi free day, and there I was, this sort of suddenly imposed on me, and I hadn't prepared for it. I had to use a landline to check in with my family, but it was amazing. It was brilliant. It was a good reminder that, the world goes on without you sitting there on Twitter and checking your emails, that life happens and you can come back to it on Monday morning.
Yeah.
So, Kate, what's your one thing that you're talking about this week?
So the one thing I'm talking about this week is I finished reading Cal Newport's book on deep work, probably a couple of months ago, to be honest with you. But the book was great. There was one particular concept that he had that really stuck with me, and it's his concept around looping. And he talks about how difficult it is to come up with new ideas, basically. And he uses this idea of looping. If you can sort of visualize that, you sort of stay inside your ideas. Like if you think of your brain as a cylinder, you stay inside. And he says often when you go away to think about something, you just think about all the old things that are associated with it. And that's what he calls looping. So that really stayed with me because I'm doing a lot of work around thinking at the moment. And I'm sort of relating it to a concept that I'm working with at the moment, which is called leaning into the future. And it's come from sort of observations I've had about the types of conversations we have around what's broadly happening socially. So socially and politically. I do find that we're very much caught in looping conversations. And what I mean by that is we sort of complain about the way the world is. And look, I'm as guilty of it as the next person, particularly politics, corporate, and nothing changes. And, you get caught in that. And I think that is a looping conversation. And I've been challenging myself and people I'm conversing with to lean into the future when they talk. So to talk about how they think the world should be, no matter how crazy as well. That's the other thing. Like, how do you think it should work? If I take politics as a very quick example, we look at politics, we put our head in our hands, we moan. There's some interesting ideas out there around new styles of democracies, like citizens' democracies kind of thing. But, we sort of push them off to the side because we think they're a bit crazy, effectively.
And we throw that, that'll never work. That'll never happen.
It's the hard conversation again. I think that's what you get to, isn't it?
Yeah, it is hard. But I agree. But I think that what I'm trying to say is you can set, it's trying to set the conversation up by saying to people, in this conversation, I want to lean into the future. Don't get stuck telling me how bad things are. Let's lean into the future. So you create the space and the possibility for people to do that, rather than when you're talking about it and you bring up the idea of new democracies or citizens' juries or, using technology, having more referendums, and people go, oh yeah, all too hard. Anyway, isn't it terrible what Barnaby Joyce just did? And it is, sure, whatever. Doesn't matter, doesn't change things. What changes things is leaning into the future so that we start to co-create the future. So that's what I'm beating people around the head with at the moment.
It sounds like there's a book in that as well.
Probably.
Definitely a great presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, ladies, if we were to lean into the future on something, like how would you like the world to be? Share with me your craziest idea for the type of change you'd like to see happen. Is there an area?
Do we share that right now?
Share it right now. Yeah, I've created the space for us to lean into the future. What would you like to see being different?
Well, I guess for me, it would be, I want to bring up climate change. I'm trying to find a way of how that would be different, but I guess leaning into the future of a place where we actively try to embrace the avoidance mechanisms that we have available to just think and believe that we can actually have a future for our great grandchildren, that we can have this amazing planet and be environmentally aware and have great renewable energies. I mean, again, it's hard because I'm trying to go back to what the problem is, but I want to look at what the future could be regarding that. And I don't know, Georgie, have you got an idea on that?
I suppose if I imagine, when I think about the utopic world that I kind of write about wishing, I think I'd really like us to be explicit about imagining how the world would look if our expectation was that men would engage in caring the same way women do. And I think that's absolutely possible, but I think it would require change. But I think that's something that is... I would like us to be quite explicit about imagining that.
Yeah, and so what I would say, I agree. So I think they're both fabulous. I think the idea, the concept that I'm dealing with, lean into the future. So you lean into the future and you imagine that and you make it a reality and then you work it backwards. Yeah. Because what generally happens is we lean into the future and then we go, it's too hard, or it changes. You know what I mean? And then we sort of relax and we kind of get back into the loop, if you know what I mean. Men won't do this and we won't do that. You'll be pleased to hear I've stopped buying all plastic bottles in our house because of climate change and plastic bottles. So I think that kind of conversation is more inspiring. I guess that's what I'm about. It inspires people to take action rather than it's all too hard, it's all too difficult. What can you do in your community? What can you do in your own life? Because
could we have imagined a world, just on what you said about drink bottles, where, say, the coffee cups and the keep cups, if you'd imagined that a few years ago and said, well, wouldn't it be great if we all took our own coffee cups when we got taken? It just would sound ridiculous. That would never happen. No one's going to do that. Who's going to wash it up? Obviously it's easy, but I mean, that is becoming quite normal now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it makes me think think of my favourite saying, which I hope I'm going to get right. You know that Margaret Mead one, never think that a group of people can't change the world. It's the only thing that ever has, you know. And so that's what I'm playing around with at the moment, really about, you know, creating futures and using language to create futures, because in the end, language is what creates futures, you know. So that's why I'm talking about looping, leaning into the future, getting people to change their language about how they talk about current issues, so they're not stuck in the loop, but they're leaning into the future. Can you imagine if everybody leaned into the future with their conversations? Can you imagine how powerful that would be?
I think that maybe we also need more time to lean into the future, and maybe that goes back to the busyness point that you made. Less busy, more leaning into the future, more thinking about what it could be. And with that, we do need to wrap up. Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Georgie.
Thank you. It was a great conversation today.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.